You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm doing good. I've been super busy lately, but I look forward to this time each week where we get to just talk about identity and access management. But yeah, lately I've been working on, preparing for a lot of upcoming events. I'm helping out Mike Engel over at One Cosmos with a webinar. It's going to be on what happened to MFA. MFA tried to fix passwords, but how do we fix MFA? And so it's like kind of one of those topics that is getting a lot of headlines lately, especially with some of the things that have happened in the news. So anybody who's interested in attending that webinar, it's going to be on September the 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. Eastern Time, I should say. And you can just go to onecosmos.com to register for that event. And like I said, it'll be Mike Engel, CEO of One Cosmos, and myself. And on top of that, we've got the Authenticate Conference, which is the FIDO Alliance Conference coming up in October, and then the Okta Octane Conference, which will be in November. So hopefully we'll be blasting through a bunch of additional podcast episodes during those conferences as well. But I'm also hoping to be able to actually sit in on some of the sessions, because if you check out the agendas of the conferences, it looks like a lot of good content.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath, especially because we're going to be at we'll be at Authenticate 2022, and we'll be doing podcasting. And you're a total slave driver when it comes to booking guests. So I end up sitting in a room somewhere, recording and editing while you're out gallivanting with the Identerati. But I am hopeful that I will have some free time from my my podcast overlord here to get to take in some of the sessions at least.
Hey, Jeff, I think this would be a good time to tell the story about Authenticate 2021, because
again,
I pretty much tried to do the same thing to you again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the story is it's a story as old as time, right? Jim volunteers to give a presentation at a conference. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do it, but I will go and support you and help with the content and kind of stuff like that, and go cheer you on. Flash forward to the day that we're flying out. Jim calls me sick. And he's like, yeah, like you probably shouldn't go. This is the height of the pandemic, right? If you're coughing, you probably have COVID, or at least that's what everyone's going to assume. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm given the the talk at the conference, which I did, and you totally left me high and dry. And I will never let you live it down. And you continue to volunteer for speaking engagements, and my fear is that I end up having to do it by myself or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, hey, I was disappointed too, because I had gotten upgraded to first class. It was the day before. And
that's what you were most concerned about.
That was what I was most concerned about, not the fact that you had to do the presentation by yourself. And by the way, I did submit a question for you to answer.
Yeah. What is I am? That's a running joke that we always have, whatever company we happen to be working with. Yeah. So we got a bunch of different things going on. We've got, you've got the One Cosmos webinar that you'll be doing. I'll put a link in the show notes so people can, if you support the podcast, go support Jim. I can't make it. I'll be on a flight, so I'll be probably listening to it either on the flight or catching it afterwards. But you can register. I'm sure there'll be a replay for that. We'll be at Authenticate 2022 in Seattle in October. So hopefully we'll get to meet some folks there as well. And then we'll be at the Octane conference. At least that's what we're planning on in San Francisco in November. Potentially doing some more podcasting and talking with interesting folks in the identity world and sort of kind of covering that event and doing that kind of thing. So I think that's a great segue to lead into our guest, who is from Okta, and we'll get to that. His name is Andres Aguiar. He's the product and engineering leader with Okta. Welcome to the show, Andres.
Thank you, Chef and Jim. Very happy to be here with you today.
Hopefully I didn't butcher your last name too bad. I tried to get it as right as I can, but you're also joining us from a country we have not yet spoken, at least I haven't, Uruguay. So thank you for joining us from the Southern Hemisphere as well. One of the things that we like to get into when we have a guest on for the first time is to really kind of learn the origin story. How did people get into identity? Kind of help set the context of kind of your perspective and how you approach things. So I think that maybe to kick off this conversation, before we get to our main topic, which is going to be around fine grained authorizations or FGA, tell us a little bit about your identity backstory. How did you get into this field? Is it something that you chose, or did the identity world choose you?
Okay, yeah. So I mainly worked in companies that build developer tools, developer products in the past. And so that's my main background. And I always work in those kind of companies. And 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to join Auth0. I knew both co-founders. One is from Argentina, which is very close to Uruguay, both from Argentina, but one of them was working in the US. And I had the chance, and Auth0 had that interesting blend of being a company that target developers, but also working on identity. So I kind of got to identity by the development tools or development products world. And I quickly got into the core of Auth0, so building the login and MFA flows as a product manager. So I had to get up to speed pretty quickly. And I've been working in this domain for almost 6 years already. So yeah, that's my journey to identity. And in the last few months, I moved to work on the authorization side. And that is on what brings us here today.
And Andres, I have to give a shout out to Mike Pastor, who's your colleague from Okta. And by the way, for anybody who's listening, he's a great follow on LinkedIn, and he'd be more than happy, I think, to connect with just about anybody. But he introduced us to you and introduced this idea of something that you're working on, FGA, fine grained access or fine grained authorization. And authorization is such a big topic in identity and access management. And it's something that people tend to get into as they are further along in their journey. So, what I thought we could basically start out with was kind of a 101, talking about what is authorization and then what is fine grained authorization.
Sounds good. So, it's very easy to confuse like authentication and authorization. So let's start by talking about both. Authentication in general tries to prove that you are a specific person, right? In general, you cannot prove that you are a specific person by logging into a site, but basically what you're proving is that the credential that you still have access to the same credentials that you use when you register for that site, right? So if I had a phone number, a password, an email, I still have it, and I can still provide it as a proof that I'm the same person who registered to the site. So authorization on the other side is more what are the things that you can do once you log in to that site, right? So the permissions, the actions that I can perform. Can I perform this specific action on a specific page or resource or document? That is more about authorization, the permissions you have in your system. For example, like now in Twitter, some people can't reply to a specific tweet, right? So depending on how you tweet, you can say only the people who are mentioned can reply to this tweet. When I log in to Twitter, I may be authorized or not to reply to a tweet depending on those authorization policies that Twitter specified in their application. Right? With fine-grained authorization, it's in general when the initial ways we implemented authorization in the industry were coarse-grained, mainly role-based access control. When you basically decide that, this specific role can perform these actions, and the actions are very generic, like, for example, post a tweet or delete a tweet, right? But it's not possible with role-based access to specify things like only the people who were mentioned in the tweet can reply to the tweet, because it's not enough to say the role you have or to decide if you can perform the action or not. Right? So depending on how granular the permissions that you need to specify in your system, you might need to implement a fine-grained authorization model or a coarse-grained authorization model like role-based access control.
Yeah, no, that's a great introduction. One of the things that I find is that, sometimes people get tripped up on, how to use a term. So the term roles gets used so differently by so many different folks in so many different contexts. Sometimes it's product specific, sometimes is the generic term of roles. So using that one term differently. But then there are other situations where you have two different terms, but they get confused or used in place of one another. And for me, that's the term authorization and entitlements. And I'm wondering if you could kind of help us differentiate between those two terms.
Actually, this is interesting because you mentioned this question in our previous conversations, and I say it's hard to explain, right? So I was trying to think a little about how to explain it, and because at the end of the day, they are very related. Okay? So entitlements are the things that the traits or the properties that the user has, okay? And based on that, you define if the user is authorized to perform an action or not, right? For example, the fact that I belong to a role is an entitlement. The fact that a user can perform this action if they belong to that role, that is an authorization rule, right? And in general, entitlements can come from two places. One are kind of the things that you are allowed. So roles is an entitlement, but it can also be like you are using a B2B SaaS product. You are using like the basic tier. The basic tier can only use some features. Okay, that's also an entitlement, right? The features that I can use as a user of this product. So there's a lot of things that can that fit the profile of that user, that are properties of the user that can be then used for making authorization decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a similar question that we did an episode on, similar in style, which was, what's the difference between digital identity and access management? And it's like, it's actually a deeper answer, and everybody answers it a little bit differently. And for me, with the entitlements and the authorization, it's like entitlements are the data, and authorization is the enactment of that data. And I made up that term enactment, and then what I realized was, the terms are very important. And I kind of thought back when I was thinking about authorization to the Xacamol standard, right? I mean, that was it for authorization back in the day, and everybody thought like, okay, that's the shift that's going to take place. I wonder, really, whatever happened with Xacamol, is still important? Are people still, does it have a future? So that's my first question. My second question is, what I liked about Xacamol was that it defined certain roles within authorization. So you had your policy decision point, your policy enforcement point, which, so if you think about it, those are very important. Like where in the chain are you deciding whether or not an authorization should succeed? Where are you enforcing that? Do you want to do that from a central location or within the application, for example? Policy administration points. So all of those different roles have exact definitions. I'm wondering, when it comes to like the fine grained authorization or just authorization in general, are those role names even relevant anymore? And then, I know I'm asking a lot of questions all combined into one question here, but I think we just need to know about this at like the IAM practitioner level. Like, what do I actually need to know? This isn't really like the developer podcast, but like if I'm somebody who's implementing IAM systems, what is it about these concepts that are still relevant today?
Perfect. So I wasn't deep into identity when Xacamol happened, so like I don't know how it began to become a thing. I can infer based on the context. So at the moment, most of the industry was building XML-based specifications for everything, right? And Xacamol helps to define specification for doing attribute-based access control. It's something still very relevant, right? Doing attribute-based access control, and there wasn't a standard way of doing it. So the Xacamol specification tried to fill that void, and I think it's important to define standard that can help you implement this in a way that is interoperable and that companies can use consistently across different vendors. I haven't seen picking it up a lot in Steam. So there's a few companies that implemented that, but they didn't become a real standard that is widely adopted by. It is a real standard, but it's not widely adopted by the industry. And right now, for example, in Auth0 and Okta, we are implementing authorization products that are not using Saxon as a way to specify permissions. And the industry, they're having other approaches. There's a product called OpenFGA that is very successful in managing permissions for infrastructure things, right? Yes, that defines policies in a different way, and it has become like a de facto standard for defining authorization policies in that context, and it's not using Saxon, right? So from that perspective, I think it was an interesting attempt by the industry, but it didn't pick up enough, or didn't have enough adoption to be significantly relevant today. That's my opinion, personal opinion. Then about the different enforcement, the enforcement point, decision points that Saxon will define, those concepts are still relevant. So there's a place where you need to enforce your authorization policy, right? And it can be in the application, it can be in an API gateway, and then whatever you decide, it can be in an API proxy. So it can be in different places where you can decide where you want to call the code that is going to enforce the policy, right? It's going to decide if the user can log in or not, right? So you have like the enforcement point, which is, if I'm building an application just with code, it will be at the beginning of my API implementation, right? That is the place I'm going to check if the permission, the user has permission to perform the action or not. Then you have the decision point, which will be, okay, if I'm using an externalized policy engine, I will call at that moment a different service that is going to tell me that if the user can perform the action or not. That will be the decision point. Right? And if I'm building an application without an externalized decision policy engine, the decision point is going to be also in code, right? I want to write myself like after in the same routine that I'm checking the user can perform action, I'm going to ask if the user has this role, right? And that will be the decision point. It will be in code. So it can be in different places depending on how you want to architect your application. Other concepts there are administration, the policy administration point. If you're using a product that policies are not in code, you need a way to manage those, right? That's still the case, right? If you using any service to manage your authorization policies, you need a way to manage them, right? The policy administration point. And then you have the policy information point. You need data to make those decisions, right? Who's going to get that data, right? Okay, so all of those concepts still exist. In a simple app, they can be all in the code, right? But in more sophisticated architectures, where you want to decouple those things, yes, those are going to be in different services that can manage sometimes all of them together, sometimes one for each of these points, right? You might have a tool to manage policies, another to handle the data, another to handle the decision. Right? And so, yeah, I think it's still relevant and useful to reason about how authorization is implemented or architected in the system.
Yeah, so when you're putting together that architecture diagram of how you're doing authorization, those terms and kind of identifying those points is so important. I have a kind of a long history in the access management side of IAM and kind of thinking about how a lot of access management systems worked, pre-Okta days, right? So it was the Oracles and SiteMinders, and the most commonly used integration pattern was you would install an agent, a filter on your web server, your Java server, or your IIS server, for example, and it would filter requests, every HTTP request. And those systems became good at kind of coarse-grained authentication, which was at the level of, this subdirectory, or, basically using URL filtering, like you either have access to it or you don't. Which kind of led me to my next question, right? Because that's not the way applications are built today at all, right? They're primarily using OpenID Connect, or some are using SAML, but it's still ultimately, to get to that level of fine-grained authentication or authorization, I should say, is generally passing data to the application, and the enforcement point is at the application level. I'm wondering, with fine-grained authorization, is it dependent on any of the specific authentication technologies, or like SAML or OpenID Connect? Like, is FGA requiring one of those standards to ride on top of? And then ultimately, is the data that's coming from FGA taking over any of the like decision point or enforcement point, or is it still coming back to the application to enforce, okay, this person has access to this button, I'm going to show them the button, etc.?
Okay, good. So when we talk about FGA, there are kind of two main ways of implementing FGA. One is called ABAC, attribute-based access control, and the other one is called REBAC, relationship-based access control. And in both cases, what you end up relying to is on an identifier that you get from whatever way you ended up logging into the application. If you're using on OIDP with your IDC, you're going to get the subject from the ID token or the access token, and you're going to use that as a user ID, right? And then you're going to, for example, if you use ABAC is attribute-based access control, and you're going to probably require data from your database to decide if the user can perform an action. So let's say you want to approve, you have an endpoint that you want to approve if a user can verify if a user can approve an expense report, right? So the endpoint is approve expense report. You need to check that the user has permission to do that. You will need to know if the user can approve that specific expense report, not any expense report. To do that, you need data. You need to know, for example, if the person who submitted the expense report is a direct report of the person who is approving it, right? So that could be a use case, right? So I can only approve expense reports from my direct reports. I need to check if the submitter of that expense report is a direct report from the user that is submitting it, approving it. So to do that, I go to the database, I get the data, and then I decide if I want to let the user approve the expense or not. To do that, I get the user ID that I got from the ID token, and I go to my database and find if that user ID is the manager of the submitter of the report, and if that's the case, then I let him go, right? So from that perspective, I'm doing fine-grained authorization. I'm relying on whatever user ID was provided to me. That's fine. Right? There are other ways to implement fine-grained authorization with like relationship-based access control. There are a few products trying to do that today, and mostly inspired in implementation by Google called Google Zanzibar. So Google's published a paper of how they did their internal authorization service, which was called Google Zanzibar. The way that works is you specify relationships between different entities. So you can say this user is the manager of this other user. This user was the submitter of this expense report. And there you use the user IDs that were provided by your IDP, right? So in any case, you are bound to a specific authentication method. You can use any way to authenticate and still do fine-grained authorization with ABAC or with relational-based, with REBAC, right? So both work.
Does the application development need to be developed with FGA in mind, or can you take an application that was developed previously and integrated into an FGA-based framework?
If you take FGA as a generic term, then let's say you have an application built with role-based access control, right? And then you have this scenario where you want to approve the expense only if the user that is approving it is the manager of whoever submitted the report. You can just do an extra query in that method, right? And then you're going to have fine grained authorization. Okay, so fine grained authorization is kind of, I don't rely just on role-based data. I need to know data about the specific resource I'm changing or I'm acting on to make a decision. So from that perspective, it can be, usually most role-based implementations today end up doing some kind of ABAC, because at some moment they need to make a decision about if the specific resource or the specific record that the user can access. Okay, so from that perspective, there's nothing to change, and it's a way to gradually go from role-based access to attribute-based access by adding more queries on your product. Now, if you want to build a more sophisticated implementation of attribute-based access control, and you want to do, for example, a policy-based access control, where the definition of that access policy is outside of the product and outside of the code, then yes, you will need to architect your application differently, define the authorization policy somewhere else in an external tool or product, right? And then from your code, call those policy actions. That implies, yeah, you can do that gradually, but it's a significant change on your application. And if you're using a product that is relationship-based access control, the way those product works is that they need the data of how users are related between themselves and with the different entities to make a decision. So you need to push all the data from your existing systems into those FGA stores, so then they can make the decision, right? That also requires, thinking it that way, because it requires a lot of work to get all the data in that system to then be able to call it with low latency from your endpoints, right?
I think that's where it's so data dependent, it sounds like to me, and you can feel free to educate me on this, but I think of things like RBAC, PBAC, ABAC. We talked with KBAC, knowledge-based authentication. You mentioned REBAC, relationship-based authentication, which maybe is the same sort of thing. We haven't really settled on an acronym for it. But the underlying pinning for all this is the quality of the data and the amount of data to be able to make those sorts of decisions. Judging by the name, fine-grained, authorization, I'm assuming that we need to have a lot of, metadata to be able to make these sorts of decisions. You mentioned the ability to make these decisions in more real-time format, which I think is kind of where the direction of ABAC typically goes. We know about a lot of struggles that organizations have with RBAC and trying to get roles implemented. From your perspective, where do you see FGA kind of fitting into that world of, organizations, they say they want to be role-based access control. Okay, great. And then they realize how hard it is and they sort of like stumble through it. And then maybe they settle on attribute-based access control. Is FGA basically taking attribute-based access control to the next level by having just more data to be able to make those decisions? Or does it fit somewhere else within that sort of that ecosphere of different authorization models?
Yeah, so just to clarify there, so an attribute-based access control is FGA, okay? So because it's not coarse-grained in the terms of only talking about roles, when you talk about an attribute, then that attribute can be as like fine-grained as a specific document. So if you have a permission for a specific document, you can build that with an ABAC implementation, right? If you want to use FGA with a REBAC implementation, relationship-based, then the REBAC engine, we will need all the data to make those decisions. So maybe I need to explain a little more how the REBAC works and the Zanzibar mode works to make more sense. So Google had a problem back in the I think they did this initially for Google Plus, which I think was probably early 2010, 2012, something around that date, right? And they decided they want to build an externalized product to manage authorization. And they end up building a service that they use for all products in Google. So each time you share a document in Google with a specific person, you are writing some data into the Zanzibar implementation. Okay? And why they needed to do that? For two reasons. First, they wanted to have a consistent way to to manage authorization across Google for all products. In most cases, what happens today is like you go to a company, there are 10, 20 teams, they need to build authorization. They do it all in a different way. And in this case, what we will say is we want a consistent way, same APIs, way of thinking for all of our teams. Okay, and then they also needed to scale for Google Docs. Right? So each time you kind of give permission to someone and then someone else wants to access the document, that needs to be very fast, very low latency, high availability, right? So they need to build a product that helped doing that. The issue with ABAC is that in ABAC, you need to go and get the data yourself, and that usually happens in your existing transactional databases, right? So I want to know who is the manager of this user. I need to do a join with some table, right? Check the expense report data, look at the expense report table. And if you think of a world of like a service calls another service, it calls another service, each of those services needs to do the same, sometimes the same database queries, sometimes different, sometimes to different services. That adds a lot of latency, a lot of potential points of failure. Like any of those services down or is very low, it impacts that API call. So what Google said is to be able to make those decisions in a way that is scalable, low latency, and reliable, we need the data. So we cannot rely on the developers or the people who's implementing this, go and get the data at the moment of evaluation. We need to have the data before. So what they define, it's a model where you provide to the Zanzibar store tuples that basically say, this user is a member of this role. This user can write this document. This role can write this document, and things like that, right? This group can write this into this folder. So there are policies, permissions that you assign to different entities and to different resources. And based on that, when you need to ask, can Chef add to this document, it will say yes and no, depending on the folder the document is, the group you are, the role you have, the organization you belong to, things like that, right? And so that is like the relationship-based FGA model, and which is the one that I'm working on in Okta, and there's a few people trying to build the same kind of implementation, right? Which is trying to solve that problem, and that problem requires the data. And one of the problems of implementing a solution like this is that you need to get all the data into the store, which might be challenging depending on your architecture, your project, your product.
It sounds like what you're describing to me sounds an awful lot like a knowledge graph, essentially.
Yes.
And building a centralized repository of all this data. Is that the gist of this? Is there needs to be some sort of central master database, table, graph, whatever technology, right? Is being blockchain, as much as I hate to use that word, right? Where all this data is basically stored, centralized, kept up to date, and then leveraged as the authoritative source for these sorts of decisions when it comes to authorization. Is that an accurate way to portray it?
Yes, and it's not that we need all the data, right? We just need the minimal data possible to make these authorization decisions. For example, we don't need to know, I need to know this document ID is in this folder ID, right? I don't need to know the content of the document, the title of the document, nothing else, right? So it's just the IDs of the entities and how they are related with them, right? And with that, you can make those decisions in a way that is very fast, scalable, low latency. And so that is what and that is kind of the new kid on the block, right? Of how to build authorization today, and what is a lot of companies are trying to implement. This after Google did it, there were a lot of other companies that try to do similar things with like a Airbnb, Expedia, Carta. They are all build their own flavors of something like this, and that's what's kind of gave us kind of more certainty to try to follow this path, because it seems like it was a good path to take. And the challenge for us was that we wanted to build a SaaS product, right? So it's not a product that you're going to build itself and host inside of your company that is tuned for your specific scenarios. We needed a product that anyone could use, and anyone could define their own entities and relationships. Okay.
A lot of the use cases that you just described, and even kind of the companies that have gone down this path, are consumer focused. Is that really sort of the intention for FGA? Is it more of a consumer focused sort of approach? You did talk about some potential, use cases inside. We'll call them like enterprise use cases. But I don't know if most enterprises are to the maturity level at this point to be able to have the number, quality of attributes needed to make some of these decisions. I guess, where do you see sort of like the main use case for FGA at this point?
Yeah, so we've been talking to a lot of companies that want to implement something like this, and most of the use cases are B2B SaaS scenarios. Right? If you think about the B2B SaaS, it's interesting because when you start your first version of a B2B SaaS product, you probably don't have you have an admin role and a user role, right? And that's enough for B1, right? And after that application evolves and you start getting more sophisticated customers, they ask you for more sophistication in how you manage permissions to that app, right? So first they might ask you, I want roles. Then they might ask you, no, I want to actually implement fine grained authorization, which is different users can access different specific documents or folders depending on who they are and things like that, right? So in our view, every B2B SaaS company will eventually need to implement fine grained authorization in their products because that's what customers, their enterprise customers, are asking them, right? And initially, maybe the smaller customers want, when they want to go kind of upstream in the size of the companies, they are requiring those kind of permissions. Right? So yes, so we see a lot of opportunity there for B2B SaaS companies to implement fine grained authorization, and also initially in a B2B SaaS product, by definition, you have one attribute, which is the tenant or the customer, right? That segregates information, right? So if you're an admin of an organization, you cannot see data from another organization, right? So that is already a little fine-grained in the sense that you cannot model that just with roles. You need to also have at least one attribute, which is the organization that the user belongs to, right? To filter data depending on that, right? And then it gets more complex. You want to build a teams have people which have access to folders, and they want to share documents with themselves with different permissions. So it gets more complex in a lot of those B2B scenarios, and products like this kind of make sense.
Hey, Andres, I just couldn't help. I mean, we're on an audio only podcast, but we have our cameras on. Couldn't help but notice you have a shirt on that says OpenFGA. And could you talk to us a little bit about what that is? I'm assuming that's part of your mission in life at the moment.
So Auth0, Auth0 was acquired by Okta a couple of years ago, and at the moment we were building a product for solving fine grained authorization, and Auth0 has more the developer brand, and so we ended naming our initial product Auth0GA, even if it was already part of Okta, and then we decided to open source it. Okay, so right now I'm working. My mission in life is two products. One that is called Auth0GA, and another one that is called OpenFGA. OpenFGA is the open source version of Auth0GA. We use OpenFGA to build Auth0GA, and the goal is that yes, we want to build OpenFGA with the industry. We think that a product like this is going to be very important moving forward for building authorization and in all of these use cases we've been discussing. And we think a company like Okta can, with the right partners, can make it reality, like having a kind of de facto standard of implementing fine grained authorization in this relationship-based access control way. And we think the way to do that is through open source. But we have customers that want to also buy a managed service that they don't need to maintain, they need to operate, that they make sure that security is taken care of, that the compliance is taken care of, and all those kind of things. And for that, we are still going to have a cloud version of the product that you can use without hosting it yourself.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, open source has had a big impact on our industry over time, and it's good to see that spirit is still kind of alive and well.
Yes, and Auth0 and Okta both have been contributors to open source for a while, but it's the first time that we kind of launch a product that is kind of the core of the product is open source, right? So we have a lot of open source libraries and things that you can use with Okta or at zero, but never kind of a main product that was built that way. So it's pretty exciting from my perspective.
So if I were to look into the knowledge graph of Andreas, what would I find as the go-to karaoke song for you? We're going to end things on a lighter note here. So this is my way of tying it back together. I'm thinking of the fine grained, authorization that says, hey, Andreas is about to perform karaoke. Here is the song that he's going to perform.
Yeah, so it's fun because karaoke songs tend to be like songs everybody knows and likes to sing and are fun. And I usually don't like to sing those songs. Right? I'm more like to sing a song I like. And so my go-to song is "On the Road" from Bruce Springsteen. And when I sing it in Uruguay, nobody knows it, or not a lot of people. So it's not as fun. And when I sing it in New Jersey, that is more fun. But yeah.
Jim, what's your go-to for karaoke?
I mean, I have to admit, like, the hardest part about doing a podcast is listening to the podcast once in a while and hearing my own voice. So it doesn't get any better when I do karaoke and someone takes a video of it and I'm like, oh my God, did I really get up and sound like that? But, a few shots of whiskey or whatever it takes to get up there on that stage. So if I'm with Denise, my girlfriend's name is Denise, if I'm with her, we like to do a Kid Rock duet with Sheryl Crow, Picture. And so that's our go-to for when we're together. Now, if I do a solo, it's going to be terrible no matter what. But I like anything by ZZ Top. And I also like Poison. So anything within their catalog. But it's just it just sounds like a lot of screaming, Jeff. It's not good. So when I'm there with Denise, I try and pick a song where the male part is very short and the female part is the dominant part. And so that's kind of what we've settled on. What about you?
Well, that's probably the way to go because she's like a professional singer. So
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, nobody who's there at the bar or whatever we're doing the karaoke at wants to hear me. But when she sings, it's like, oh, people start coming up to her and asking her to do duets with them. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm here.
I'm with you on the voice thing. I do not have a voice for singing. You could argue I don't have a voice for talking either, but I still somehow do it. I think for me, it's probably, I like to go back to my guys at Queen and do Bohemian Rhapsody.
Cool.
It is something that I generally only perform after severe inebriation, let's just say, which is a very rare occurrence for me. And I will absolutely sing every part of that song, including all the highs and the lows and everything. Now, I said sing, I didn't say sing well. So I'll just kind of make that stipulation out there that it is unlikely that anyone will ever witness this, and it is probably for their own benefit that they do not. But that's my go-to would be Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen.
Well, at least you picked a short song.
Yeah, exactly. Prolong the pain for everybody.
Yeah, that's sort of the mission. Like the person who's like putting you into the system, like, yeah, we don't have that song.
It's like Stairway to Heaven, right? You don't go into the guitar store and start playing that.
That's
or
right.
Freebird or something like that. Andres, you've been very generous with your time, and I want to make sure you can get on with your day here. Before we wrap things up, you've educated myself and hopefully others about FGA and sort of where it fits within the identity and access management ecosphere. Are there any final thoughts or takeaways that you'd like to get out there for the folks who are listening that want to either get more information about or things that they should be thinking about when it comes to FGA?
Yeah, so I will recommend them to Google about Google Zanzibar, and because it's kind of it seems to be becoming like a popular way to implement authorization in general, and it has like these two great things, which is a way to do fine grained authorization and also a way to have a centralized way to manage authorization in a company, right? And both things are very valuable in the. So I hope and I think that in the next few years this will become a thing, and a lot of people are going to be like trying to implementing this model. So it might be a good thing to start learning about it.
Right on. And I'll have a link in our show notes to openfga.dev, which looks like a pretty good website for folks who are interested and want to get more involved with sort of what it is, learn more about it, in addition to Googling. It is weird to say Google Zanzibar. It sounds like a double negative, but here we are. Jim, how about yourself? Any final thoughts on fine-grained authorizations or, singing melodies with your girlfriend?
Nothing else on singing. Great topic today. Very informative. Hopefully somewhat entertaining for folks. Just a reminder about the webinar coming up in a couple of weeks. And hopefully we can tweak those numbers and get a few more people to attend. It's on the 22nd at 1 p.m. And we'll have a note in the show notes, a link to the podcast, or I'm sorry, the webinar. And finally, a shout out to Mike. Thanks a lot for hooking us up with Andreas, because it was a great guest today. Thank you, Andreas. Anybody who wants to link up with me on LinkedIn, I'm very open to networking. And Andreas, I would assume you are as well.
Yes, please. Yep.
All right.
If you can spell my name, you will be able to find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Or we'll put it in the show notes.
I will definitely have a link to your LinkedIn profile in our show notes so people can check that out. There's always links for Jim and I. We're always happy to connect with folks that are out there. I'll have links to a whole bunch of stuff. Basically, we'll have Andres, our LinkedIn. I'll have a link to openfga.dev. We'll have a link to the webinar that Jim is doing. It's called MFA, Tried to Fix Passwords, but How Do We Fix MFA? Great, sexy title. I'm sure Jim will deliver and things like that. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. You can check us out on the web, identityattthecenter.com. We're on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. And thanks everyone for listening. And we'll talk with everyone in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityattthecenter.com.